U.S. President Joe Biden gave a very controversial speech on Thursday, September 1st, and a lot of people are talking about it, especially if you didn't vote Democrat this last election in the United States. We have as our guest Marc Zell. He is the chairman of Republicans Overseas Israel and the Vice President and General Counsel of Republicans Overseas International. And I wanted to reach you, if I can, Marc, before you come on and answer my question. First of all, is there anything you want to add to your description?
Well, first, Tamar, thank you very much for having me on your program. I wish you a very good week. I'm also an international attorney and was counsel for the Ben & Jerry's company here in Israel in connection with their victory over the Ben & Jerry's subsidiary in the United States in connection with the BDS boycott or attempted BDS boycott of Ben & Jerry's in Israel, and we had a great victory there, really on two occasions. And I do a lot of litigation in the federal courts in the international area, including one case that was in the Supreme Court this past year on Holocaust litigation, and which will be probably going up back to the Supreme Court in the next year or so. Anyway, so that's what I do, and a father of 8 children and 19 grandchildren here in Israel.
Wow. Amazing. You should have a lot of nachat, or as we say, like happiness and pride from your brood.
That I have.
Honor to you.
That's made me a very rich man, I have to say.
Amen. All of us. Yes, all of us. All right. So I want to open this interview up because I want to talk about that speech that Biden gave. But this is an email I got from one of my listeners. He writes, Tamar, I feel like a Jew in Germany after hearing Biden's speech. What is unfolding is surreal. The pushback these last 30 months has been almost shockingly slow and scant, given the tens of millions that Mayo and Stalin murdered. It is not beyond belief that 80 million MAGAs, Make America Great Again, could be slaughtered or shackled. It definitely is stunning how slow people are to awaken. And I understand better now how the Holocaust happened. My liberal friends and / family think I am some kind of Nazi for believing in basic American founding concepts and due process. Keep speaking out. Thank you. This is what he wrote me. Now, I was quite shocked to get this letter because I had not yet seen the speech of Biden. And after viewing it, I see a lot of what people are talking about, even the lighting as he was speaking, which was like red and black. And some people, I'm not saying this, but I read that some people's comments were, it reminded them of the Nazi red and black symbol and his fists up in the air. They had another picture of Hitler with his fists up in the air. They were trying to make these comparisons. And yes, it is sensational. However, one is also supposed to learn from history and not wait until it's too late. And you, as being the chairman of Republicans Overseas Israel, I wanted to get your take on Biden's speech and what you think, where you think this is going.
Well, Tamar, I was outraged by Biden's speech. Remember, this is a president who, in his inaugural address in Washington on January 20th of 2021, promised to be the great unifier and to bridge the gaps that have been the divisiveness that has been created among the American public over the past many years. But what has happened is exactly the opposite. And this speech, well, it's full of vitriol and hate and divisiveness when he calls all Republicans, basically 74 million Republicans who voted, as I did, for President Trump in 2020, and plan to do so again in the coming year and a half or 2 years. This, to call us extremists, to say that we are anti-democratarian, we're a threat to democracy, a threat to the country. I'm reading his speech right now on my other screen. I'm looking at it. Is extraordinary. Now, do I compare President Biden to Adolf Hitler or the Democratic Party to the Nazi Party of Germany? No way. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a litigator and representing Holocaust survivors and their families in litigation against Germany and against Hungary. And I am not going to suggest that as bad and as divisive as President Biden's speech on Thursday was, I'm not going to compare either him or his party to Nazis. He does, however, and this was not in the speech on Thursday, but earlier, he had called in his address to another address, he had described the Republicans who supported, or voters who supported President Trump and the Republican Party as semi-fascists. In other words, he was calling us Nazis. And this is beyond the pale, Tamar. There's no place for this. The President of the United States making these kinds of remarks about virtually half of the American electorate is utterly unprecedented, and it's very dangerous. Will it lead to a Holocaust? I'm not going there, but it is a source of great concern, because this divisiveness that we've talked about within the American public, some people have said could lead to civil war. That is something that the American public has experienced 160 years ago. We don't want that. There's no place for that. And there's no place for a president of the United States on national television in front of the very birthplace of American democracy, Independence Hall in Philadelphia, to make these kinds of derisive, outrageous remarks about his fellow American citizens.
Is he getting away with it, though?
Well, we're going to find that out in less than 60 days in the midterm elections in November 8th. I have to say that the fact is that many of the liberal media, which means most of the liberal media, most of the media, actually praised President Biden for these remarks. And so you're asking, is he getting away with it? Well, in their eyes, he apparently is. If they consider these derisive remarks praiseworthy, then they're obviously agreeing with him and are covering up the seriousness of his accusations. There's a great number of Americans, and I'm one of them, okay, who are not letting this rest, who have, through social media and in other media appearances, and in their private discussions around the kitchen table, they are rejecting this. And this is not only Republicans, but many independents and a significant number of Democrats too, are simply not agreeing to go with the president to go this far in alienating so many of their fellow American citizens. This is totally inappropriate, but it's happening tomorrow. You may ask me about this at the same time that the Department of Justice and the FBI and the Biden administration, the White House, are attacking our basic constitutional protections of the Fourth Amendment and First Amendment by invading the home of a former president of the United States who himself is likely to be a candidate for the presidency in 2024. There's no precedent for this in all of American history. And we've had periods of our history where there's been great disagreement among the American public. But to do this, to take the FBI and 30 agents and invade the president's private home in search of, on a witch hunt, basically, within 90 days of a national election, a year and a half or 2 years of a presidential election. I mean, this is scary. It really is frightening. And
did they find anything there that they can use?
Well, we don't know exactly, but recently over the weekend, the FBI published a more detailed inventory of what they found and what they took, and it includes things like personal photographs and newspapers and magazines, things that don't even come close to being sensitive or classified national or national defense documents. So they have not found anything that we know about. And of course, we don't know everything, but we don't know from what has been published thus far, either by the magistrate or the district judge in the Southern District of Florida. We don't know everything that the FBI took. But what we do know is that they ended up taking passports and all kinds of things and privileged attorney-client documentation, communications, which they have no business and no right to have taken. So, and the particular statutes that they mentioned in the request for a search warrant before Magistrate Reinhardt, there's nothing that I can see in the materials that they've been disclosed thus far, which even come close to constituting a violation of the three federal statutes, the document statutes that they mentioned in their request for search warrant, including particularly the 1917 Espionage Act.
You know, you're talking about how what they took was, would you term it as illegal, what they did?
Well, I look, to the extent that they went in without a sufficient basis for purposes of the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution to justify such a search warrant, it was illegal. Okay, now that's something the courts are going to have to determine. Okay. But for one thing, the very breadth of the request of the search warrant is called what's known as a general warrant, which is prohibited by the Fourth Amendment. That's a warrant which it's totally indiscriminate about the documents that the federal government wants to search for and seize. In this particular case, the FBI and the Department of Justice asked for every single document that was created during the Trump administration by the White House. And I mean, that on its face flies against the Fourth Amendment. And there were other things. I mean, because they didn't specify specifically what they needed, they didn't establish what the Fourth Amendment requires in the form of probable cause. And on top of all that, you have this is a dispute about documents. I mean, every single administration, okay, for the last half a century or century, during a transition from one administration to the next, every one of them involved a president taking with him documents that related to his term in office back home or for future use in a presidential library. That's permitted under the Presidential Records Act. And there are always disputes about this. You know, what can I keep as a president, or what do I have to give back to the government? Excuse me. But never have in any prior administration transition has the federal government invoked a search and seizure in order to get to resolve this dispute. And particularly in view of the fact that the president and his legal team, from what we understand, we're accommodating. In June, when the team from the National Archives went down to Mar-a-Lago, the president's home, the president was there at that time, and he dropped in and said, "Listen, if you need anything else, please, we're happy. Let me know. We'll get it to you." And the team itself, from the National Archives said, the Department of Justice said, "Okay, we don't have any problem. Looks like everything's okay. Just put an additional lock on the room, the security room." And within a month and a half, 6 weeks later, they come in, 6 o'clock in the morning, with 30 agents and with assault rifles and boats out on the intercoastal waterway, whatever it is, in a full-scale invasion of the president's home, while the former president wasn't even there. I mean, this exceeded any measure of reasonableness, and clearly points to what we're calling now the weaponization of our federal law enforcement agencies, the Department of Justice, the FBI, and of course the White House, which is supposed to ride herd over and supervise the conduct of these agencies.
So I wanted to say here that, when I ask you if you think that they can get away with it, I want to say something that an old weekly guest of mine who passed away already, her name was Shifra Hoffman. She used to say, the Constitution is only as strong as the people who are willing to go out and defend it. So if no one's going to be able to fight what happened, then they will get away with it. And I want to add here also, you were talking about civil war, the possibility, or people are talking about, could it happen? And, there was a joke somebody made when I was discussing this with someone before we met now. He was saying that, well, if it comes to a civil war, if it's between the liberal, woke, transgender, whatever, they don't even know what gender they are, etc., as opposed to the gun-toting, legal gun owners, there's no competition. But that's a joke. But I want to say here that when you have a president who, again, I don't see much of a challenge yet, and he has the FBI at his fingertips that he can use, and he's saying that people who identify as MAGA voters, that they're, quote unquote, he used these words, like you said, extremists, dangerous. I believe he used that word. They're a threat to democracy. You build up a stage and a platform like that and keep putting that in people's ears, and then you've got the army, the military, you've got the FBI, you have all these new IRS agents that you can sick on people in order to harass them. Even if the IRS loses because there was nothing wrong with people's audits, it's still a harassment, and it takes their time and their resources to fight it. And you're weakening that other side. And I'm just wondering where this could go. I mean, we've seen in history of the Khmer Rouge killing off all of their intelligentsia, and if you wore glasses, you were marked. And you see what's happening in China. If you're if you're the Uyghurs, I think that they call them, the Muslims there, many of them were taken into camps, to concentration camps. And you've seen in communist, the Soviet Union, how many millions of people were killed and starved to death. And with all the technology that we have now, and the talk that we are going towards a cashless society, and the government could perhaps stop people from traveling, from spending money, getting access to their bank account. I mean, even during Corona, when there was cash and everything was still, quote unquote, normal, banks closed and people couldn't get their money out. Not even the ATMs ran out. You came into a situation where it was like an emergency, and then the government can do things in an emergency. In fact, there's that very famous meme going around saying that if you let the government break the law during an emergency, they will create emergencies in order to break the law. So I'll leave it to you now how to respond.
Well, you have a lot in your comments there that I have to relate to. The danger of totalitarianism is really what I think was underscoring your comments, Tamar, and that's a real danger today. All right, you have a federal government, particularly in cahoots with the mainstream media and big tech social media,
right,
and is now shutting down free speech. The former president of the United States, is still banned, as I understand it, on Twitter. And this past week, we had the Joe Rogan interview with Mark Zuckerberg, the president of the head of
Facebook,
Facebook
Meta.
or Meta, yeah, where Zuckerberg admitted, I mean, to the surprise of many who listened to that interview, that he basically agreed that he was encouraged by the FBI to shut down this public discussion on his platform about the Hunter Biden laptop and influence peddling by the Biden family at a time when the FBI was in physical possession of the laptop and knew for a fact that there was no Russian interference or Russian collusion in connection with the laptop. And you have the whole saga throughout the Trump administration of the attempt by the Democrats to pin this canard of Russian collusion on President Trump and his campaign from before he took office, during the transition, and after he became president, a hoax which was proven to be utterly false, and yet had the imprimatur of the FBI, the Department of Justice, the CIA, and 51 former intelligence community leaders,
and the media,
of course, and big tech, all of which were colluding themselves. And what was true about the Russian collusion? It was the Clinton campaign, the Democratic Party, that actually paid for and bought these materials, which they passed on to the FBI, who then used them in order to obtain improperly searched warrants from the federal FSIA court and so on. This is the FISA court. So this is a real threat today. I mean, the threat of totalitarianism, of authoritarian governmental involvement to limit the free speech and interchange of ideas among the American public, particularly on the eve of a major national election, as they did in 2020 in a presidential election. So this is a very serious thing. Now, I think we also need to dial back the rhetoric about what's going on. And in your remarks, you talked about the Soviet gulags and the Khmer Rouge. That's not happening in America today. I don't believe it will happen in America. Okay.
He's got it shouldn't.
On that score, I believe in the American system of government. I believe in the American society. I believe in American values. And even though this administration and the Democratic Party are going to great lengths to curtail our constitutional liberties and to limit our ability to exchange ideas and receive information, I believe that the American public will rise up and prevent this, not through some kind of armed conflict, okay, but through the ballot. And that's and this brings me to the elections that are coming up in November. These are critical elections. And we've heard a lot about the red wave, and with the Republicans are going to take back the House of Representatives and possibly the Senate. That's not going to happen unless one thing happens. Okay, this is within our power and the power of your viewers. Tamar. That is to register to vote and to actually vote in your home states. And if you're abroad, like I am, it's essential that Americans in Israel and around the world, there's some 9 million plus Americans, citizens living outside the United States. If they voted, they can change history along with our fellow Americans back home. But only through the vote will be able to change history and to put a stop to the weaponization and this growing authoritarianism on the part of the administration and the Democratic Party. We haven't even talked about January 6th.
Okay, but I want to present to you something that a lot of people believe that the elections, the last elections, I'm not saying whether they were or weren't, but they believe that it was stolen with the mail-in ballots, with a lot of ballots thrown aside that were for Trump. I know for Israel, I believe that at least 70%, if not 80%, of American citizens living in Israel that voted would have voted Trump, and the Democrats know it, and so it's not their priority to make sure that those votes arrive. And as they say, it's not who votes, but who counts the votes. And if people don't have trust in their electoral system because they believe that already there have been so many indiscrepancies and all sorts of questions, and perhaps even proof, at least in some places, I don't know if you're going to be able to, when one side isn't playing fair and the other side is, I don't believe they're going to naturally win, even if they say come out and vote.
Right. Well, look, your point that you're raising is very important. And I think all of us as Americans, Republicans and Democrats alike, independents, need to be concerned that our electoral system is fair and that the system is legal and lawful, and that only registered voters who are entitled to vote do vote. We know that there were irregularities in 2020. And I, for one, firmly believe that was the case. I mean, here, let's just take one right now. The decision by Zuckerberg and his colleagues in the social media to shut down the public discussion and dissemination of information regarding the Hunter Biden laptop alone, according to polls that were taken afterwards, 16% of the voters that voted for Biden in 2020 have said that had they known about the Hunter Biden laptop and the Biden family influence peddling, they would not have voted for Joe Biden. That number in and of itself would have given a different result in the elections. And here I say that the president of the former President Donald Trump has been very outspoken about the problems with the 2020 election. And in this sense, I think he's correct. He's correct to do so because we have to be wary of what might happen in the coming 2022 election and again in 2024, where we see that the party in power now is trying to institutionalize those emergency measures that were put into place ostensibly because of the corona pandemic back in 2020. They're trying to make them permanent. And that means mail-in vote, universal mail-in voting, and no voter ID, and ballot harvesting, from these drop boxes that were completely unattended. And we saw evidence that the drop boxes were abused and stuffed with Democratic ballots. I'm not one who favors calling into question the results of the 2020 election. I think that's behind us, and we as Republicans and Americans generally, I think we need to look forward. But we're entitled to demand that our elections be safe and fair, and that they reflect the actual will of the American people and not be abused and manipulated through these various kind of tactics that were adopted during the corona pandemic, and which in my view skewed the results of the 2020 election. We can't have that in the future. We have to fight against that. We have to be vigilant. We have to ourselves in our communities, in our towns and cities and states and nationally in the United States, and those of us who live abroad. We have to watch to make sure this does not happen. And that means that we have to be attentive. We can't turn a blind eye. We cannot be apathetic. We have to be energized and attuned to what's going on in these elections. That means voting and making sure that the voting process is fair.
I'm just wondering, I see so much action being taken place by the Democrats and the left, but I don't see a voice. Like, it just seems to me, my impression, it's my personal impression, is that where is Donald Trump? Why isn't he speaking out? Where is there a leader to represent
All right, so Tamar, let me interrupt you.
Please.
I think maybe you're just not watching in the right places. Just this past Saturday, yesterday,
okay,
Donald Trump had a huge rally in Pennsylvania. Okay, and he's had literally, I think, I don't know, dozens, but has had several since this election season, election campaign began for the midterms. And he's been, and not only has he been making, been critically and very powerfully outspoken against the failures of the Biden administration policies at home and abroad, but he's also very eloquently called the attention to these irregularities in the electoral process and the lack of electoral integrity. So he is doing that, and he's not alone. And not only at his rallies, but he's constantly in the media. In fact, he has more and generated more media attention about his narratives than the president of the United States, sitting as a sitting president in the White House, has done, who's kind of fumbling around to try to put a sentence together, or his press secretary, tripping over herself, looking like an absolute idiot on almost a daily basis, talking about issues that are of immense concern to all Americans at home and abroad. But Donald Trump has been there. And not only it's not only Donald Trump, you've had Governor DeSantis in Florida, you have a very deep bench of potential presidential candidates, Mike Pompeo, Nikki Haley, Tom Cotton.
Okay.
I mean, it's really, and they've been all over the media. Now, not all the media wants to hear them. I mean, MSNBC and CNN, they're not keen on broadcasting the views of conservative politicians or Republican politicians. No way. Most of those people are speaking very, very effectively. Newt Gingrich and Steve Miller and others on Fox News and Newsmax and some of the conservative media, but not all Americans watch those. Okay, and it's important. It's critically important that Americans hear all views, left, center, and right. But and the Republicans, I think, have done an excellent job of articulating their position, their outrage, their disagreement, their dissent from what is going on in Washington. Okay, both with respect to the economy and the border and the crime wave and the energy crisis. All of those, you've had Jim Jordan, Jim Banks in the House of Representatives, and been on and very effectively putting the opposing point of view to the American public, but not all the media is allowing their voice to be heard.
So I hear that you're saying that there are many Americans that are disgruntled, they're not happy about what's happening, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm just trying to think, if I were living in the United States right now and I heard that speech and I had voted for Donald Trump and support him still, I think that with somebody who's in power, has the military, the media, the social media, high tech, as you said, and the FBI and the IRS, and they've got a lot more armed agents, 80,000 more or something like that?
87,000. Yeah.
Okay. I would be afraid to talk out. I would be afraid I'm going to be put on a list
So
And
here's my
okay,
challenge to you, Tamar.
yes,
Okay. First
yes,
of all, you don't have to be in America to speak out. You are an American citizen here in Israel, right? You live
yes,
in the Shomron. Are you registered to vote?
I am.
All right. And which state do you vote in?
I don't want to say.
You don't want to say. I mean,
No, I don't
so
want to say.
I challenge you. I
Yes,
challenge you, Tamar Yonah,
yes.
to step up and speak out, and not only tell us how afraid you are. Be a brave American. Be a
I'm doing
like
this interview.
you're
I think that's
you're
pretty brave.
okay. Get out
Okay.
there, vote, encourage others to vote. Don't say things like, "I would be too afraid. God forbid
Well,
something."
I've
No way.
seen it
You
before. I've seen it
no,
before in history. And
not
when
if
they've got that power, I can see how people
okay.
would be
All right, but
afraid.
don't. That's not the message.
That's not
That's
what we
not the
should
message.
do. That's not
The
what people
message
should do.
is
And that's not even what
stand up.
Democrats should do. Democrats should have the right to speak their mind as well.
Of
No one
course,
should
of
have to
course,
be afraid in the
of
United States of
course.
America, the
Of
land of the
course.
free. No
And that's
one.
why we have to change the Congress in this election and the state houses around the country in this election. This is up to us now. If
Is there
we're
a plan
intimidated,
besides going
of course,
to the polls?
of
What
course.
else?
Well, you will see one of the problems, by the way, is money. Okay, the Democrats are out fundraising the Republicans by a multiples. Okay, and sadly, a lot of that the Democratic donations are coming from the Jewish community. Okay, we have to stand up. We've got to dip into our pockets. We've got to support the Republican Party and the Republican candidates for House and Senate, for governor and state office, and also for school boards. Okay, like we just saw happening in Florida, where DeSantis' campaign to reconfigure the school board makeup in his state worked. Okay, with conservatives joining the school board for the first time. We cannot be intimidated. We must be we must act in the spirit of the American Revolution and of that great generation in which our parents and grandparents served to fight totalitarianism around the globe and to preserve our freedoms and to preserve our constitutional liberties. This is what is incumbent upon us to do. Okay, I am not going to complain about the abuses that the administration and the Democratic Party are committing now. If I don't have the right, in my view, the right even to raise my voice, unless I myself am doing everything I can to get myself to the polls, or to get the absentee ballots on time, and to get my family and friends to do the same, and not to sit home and to shake, in out of fear that the powers that be are going to want to shut us up. Yeah, they would love to do that, but the answer is democracy. The answer is the ballot, and this is the time, 60 days before the election, where we have to get off our rear ends, open our pockets, and open our mouths to make sure that the freedoms that we so cherish as Americans will be preserved. It's up to us.
Yeah, you've got to take those rights. It's not enough that they're given to you. I can
That's right.
hand you this little barbell here, but if you don't take it from me, right, then it's not going to be yours. You have to take your rights and use them correctly. And I agree that people should not be afraid to speak up, and that in fact people must speak up, because not only are you showing that there's an opposition to this, but you're letting other people know who perhaps are afraid a bit. And they're saying, wow, you know what? My neighbor feels the same way. And my boss feels the same way. And my coworker feels the same way. And my school teacher feels, et cetera, et cetera. This will embolden other people to be able to join in and be able to voice their opposition to this type of communistic totalitarian
I would put it to you
behavior
very,
that we're
I put it
hearing.
in a positive way.
It's become like a one-party country with
Well,
Biden at the helm. And that's
there's a
what we saw
real,
with the Soviet Union and with China, the Communist Party, the Soviet
okay,
Party.
okay, that is a real threat. There's somebody called it the Uniparty. And by the way, they're not just Democrats. You know, they are also statist or establishment Republicans and others who are part of this crew that would want to squelch dissent by freedom-loving Americans. And I would say when you take this issue in your hands, you take the initiative to register and to vote, to request your absentee ballots when you're living overseas. When you take that initiative, you're not only opposing this attempt by the Uniparty to assert authoritarian rule over us, you are yourselves protecting the very values that our founding fathers in the Constitution sought to safeguard. That's a positive thing. This is a firm step for freedom by registering, by voting, by encouraging your family and friends to do the same. That's the ultimate power in a democracy. It's that ballot, and we cannot be intimidated from exercising that right, and we cannot fall into apathy by saying there's nothing I can do, or I am too afraid, and sitting home and sitting on your hands. No way, Tamar. I reject that. We've got to take the initiative. We've got to get to the polls. We've got to speak out. We've got to write into our local newspapers or church and synagogue, bulletins or whatever it is, and let them know that, yes, now we've got to vote. We can no longer sit on our hands and let the authoritarian uniparty in Washington and around the country run the things and trample over our constitutional liberties.
Do you want to give one last word of and a summation of what you thought about the speech and what people should be aware of?
I have it, as I said, I have it in front of me right now, as I see the words on the screen, they're like burning into my eyeballs. I'm so ashamed. And you mentioned that the president, for some reason, his handlers decided to frame his speech with this red and black, very ominous, almost Darth Vader-ish. Some people even described it as satanic background lighting. But on top of all of that, he was positioned between two United States Marines, standing there. What message is that sending to the public at large? That that the attempt by this administration to squelch debate and to intimidate and to alienate voters on the right from
alienate Americans, not
Americans,
just voters, but Americans.
That's right. That is somehow backed up and enforced by the military might. That's a message that he was projecting and transmitting during his speech. This was a sad and dangerous turning point in American political history. And the only way that we're going to prevent this from happening is to put a muzzle on this president, prevent him from making statements like he did on Thursday, and returning to
you can't
very
muzzle him.
He's
the president, number one, and number two, he's an American citizen, and we don't want to muzzle people.
All right, I agree with that, Tamar. But the thing is, when he is controlling the bully pulpit like he's doing in these speeches, national prime time television address, he has a responsibility not to speak like this. He has a responsibility to do what he said he was going to do in his inaugural address and to unify the nation. He didn't do that. He's not doing
politicians keep their promises.
Well, I'll tell you, some politicians, like our former president,
I think Trump was one of the only ones.
He was obsessed with keeping his promises, and it's one of the reasons why I'm so proud of him and so proud that I supported him. And if he decides to run again, I believe he will be an extraordinary candidate because he stands for the values that all Americans treasure and cherish.
Well, I just want to say that I hear what you're saying about the black and the red satanic things, but I just want to say again, I'm not saying there's going to be a Holocaust in the United States. What I'm saying is that some people looked at it as a reminder of the start of how the Nazis rose to power, that the two Marines that you talked about are like the brown shirts and the thugs that surrounded him as well.
Boy.
And this is how things start. And that's why it needs to be nipped in the bud. People, as you say, should go out and vote. I just feel, if I know it's childish to look at something as it's not fair, but when I see the Democrat politicians go out like the vice president and the other woman I think she's from California, I forgot her name. She was also saying, we're going to go out and fight. We're going to fight in the streets. We're going to knock, and encouraging what I would interpret as violence and unrest. And you cannot say anything except for we have to go to the ballot box, we have to talk.
Well,
it
look,
just doesn't
I'm not,
seem like
I am against violence, and the Republicans are against violence.
Nobody wants violence,
and I'm not going to encourage it as a response to I'm not going to encourage such action. The Democrats, in fact, have done exactly that. Congressman Waters from Los Angeles, who you mentioned.
That's why I meant. Yes, I remember seeing clips of her.
The 2020 riots that went on for months, burning down businesses and government buildings and attacking law enforcement officers and causing billions of dollars worth of damage, and not a word from the president elect or the candidate Biden about.
But some of that, to be fair, was under Trump, and he didn't do anything. And some people were saying he would say, "Well, let the cities burn. They'll see these democratic cities are failures." So, but we won't go there now.
No, we
people can have their own opinions on things.
He was certainly not silent about this. He was very outspoken about it. But as president of the United States, beyond making being outspoken and making public speeches about this violence and the rioting in the streets, there's relatively little the president can do without the consent of the states in our system.
I hear you, states and the mayors. I understand that. Yes,
that's right.
And I have that as a given. All right. Well, so we'll end it there. We want to encourage people to read the Constitution, know what your rights are. I don't think that they even teach much government in school today.
They're stopping that. Can you believe that? They're stopping
because they don't want them to know. Right. They've grown a generation of Americans who are ashamed of being American, who look at themselves as white privileged people, who hate themselves, who hate their country, who hate their nation. It's very, very sad to see what's happened to this new generation.
It's a different country, Tamar. I left in 1986 with my children to come here to Israel. I don't recognize America anymore.
That's a great note to end on. Come home to Israel. If you're Jewish, now's the time. You've got the signs. God's not going to send you a telegram. It's time to leave. We saw the signs in the late 1930s, and we saw the signs throughout history. And read the signs, my fellow Jews.
I'll tell you, Tamar, one of the things I will say in that regard is Israel, with all of it, things aren't perfect here either. Right. But Israel, in terms of how it's dealing with this crazy woke world, Israel right now should be taking the hand of America and helping America become great again, restoring its values that we as a Judeo-Christian society in the United States and a Jewish society and here in Israel, these are the things we believe in. These come from our scriptures. These are embedded in our way of looking at the world. And we're together, Israel and the United States. And today,
maybe we should have a MAGA movement here, a MAGA movement, make Israel great again. All right, we'll end it there. We got
elections coming up here too, Tamar, as you know, in less than 60 days. So we've got to
make Aliyah, everybody. Make Aliyah and have your voices heard. All right. Thank you very much, Marc Zell, for being with us and sharing your take on what's happening, especially after this very disturbing speech by U.S. President Joe Biden. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Tamar.
Hey everyone, to make sure you can get access to all of our interviews, make sure to hit the subscribe button on both our YouTube and Rumble channels. Your click makes us all stronger. Thanks.